afternoon. Welcome to the Housing and Communities Scrutiny panel. Before we start these proceedings, may I bring to your attention some housekeeping matters. There's no expected fire alarm testing today, therefore if the alarm sounds, you can make your way to the nearest fire assembly point in the Civic Square. Can I please ask that you use your microphone when addressing the meeting and it's switched off when you're not using it. Your mobile devices are turned to silent. This meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of subsequent repeat viewing. By entering the Warspite room and during the course of the meeting, councillors are consenting to being filmed and the use of these recordings for well-being. So I'll move on to apologies. Is there any apologies? Anything noted? No. There's no apologies. Does any members have any declarations of interest with regard to anything on the agenda today? Nope. Minutes of the previous meetings, pages 1 to 6. Is there any comments with regard to the minutes? Is everybody happy with previous minutes? Yeah. There's no chair's urgent business today. So we've got the child poverty plan, building bridges to opportunity. It's only a verbal report, and therefore can I introduce Councillor Penworthy to start?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to come in at this stage, which is really at a point where we were before being able to prepare lots of written reports, but we wanted to bring you up to speed and answer any questions you have and take any comment. I'm joined today by Councillor Maria Lawson, who is the Vice Chair of the Cabinet Advisory Group on Child Poverty and our champion on building bridges to opportunity, and by Nick Shaw from Public Health, who's working to support us as we do this piece of work. I'm just going to, if you put the first slide up, Nick, and I'll do the introduction, and then Nick will pick up from there. There we go, it's a bit of a time lag. So just so you know where we're coming from, Cabinet approved last October that we would take a fresh approach to tackling poverty in Plymouth. Not that we'd chuck everything out, because that's not what we're doing. What we recognise is actually there's a lot of work happening across all sorts of work programmes that is about improving lives of people in Plymouth, especially those who are most deprived and most financially deprived. What we wanted to do was to build a city approach, beginning with us and moving on our existing partnerships as well, to look at how we join up all of that work. So it's not just child poverty, it's not just fuel poverty, it's not just how do we get training and skills done, but how do we build from the Plymouth plan and all of its associated action plans, the things we've already said, how do we ensure we don't duplicate and we don't have any gaps, and that we make Plymouth a place where Plymouth tackles the issues, not from a negative perspective, but building on existing practices and principles like co-production and asset-based community development, appreciative inquiry and trauma-informed work, so that we come up with a city solution to doing this, where the council has a clear leadership and facilitation role, but it's not about the council doing everything, it's about the city tackling this, because we believe that's the only way that we can address some of those bits that have been stubbornly not shifting for decades in the city, and how we can begin to attack some of those really big issues that are well beyond anything that we can do. So that's why we were doing it. Obviously, there are some key elements. The new economic strategy has a whole strand, a whole pillar on inclusive growth, which will be a lot about this. There's stuff in the skills strategy, there's stuff in housing and plan for homes, there's stuff in Thrive, there's stuff all over the place, there's even stuff in the culture strategy. You know, there are lots of people saying, how do we address this? So building bridges to opportunity now encompasses all of the work we previously did on child poverty. It takes in everything that the cost of living task force was doing, that's now very much business as usual. So that's all encompassed in this. The role of the Cabinet Advisory Group on Child Poverty will be one to look at everything that is coming under the Building Bridges to Opportunity programme once we've actually got it to a point of coming back to you with here's how it's all going to look, but to do that through the eyes of a child. So what's the impact of the work we do on children and young people in the city, so that we seek to minimise any harm to them. And so there's a whole bit of change that we've started to do. So that's just in terms of where we're coming from. Nick's been leading on this work, so I'm going to hand over to him once he's finished. All of us are very happy to field questions and to listen to comment. We're taking, this is before we've gone to Cabinet, we're going to Cabinet in May, I think, to give them an update. So, you know, we're coming to Scrutiny first, and this is very much building on the work that as a council we have been doing very proactively since 2012, when council passed a, in fact 2011 when council passed a motion on identifying gaps and tackling child poverty. So this has all come out of all of that work. So thanks, I'll pass over to Nick to pass on.
That's lovely, thank you. I'm Nick, I work in the public health team. I will give you a bit of a warning up front. I do have a speech impediment, so if it all, it's more obvious in person, but if it all breaks up, it's me. We also seem to be having a bit of a lag with the actual slides, but I'll talk and I'll hope the slides will catch up with me eventually. So I'm just going to try to give an overview of the work that we've already done in this programme, and then how that actually fits in with how we're going to actually develop the actual framework, and then a little bit about how we'll be working over the next actual 6 months to kind of draw that all together with the framework, and then to understand how that impacts on the work we've actually been doing already in the council, and also actually with our partners in the wider actual system. So the first actual stage of the work was to engage with people within the council, but also with our with kind of people in the wider actual community. So with people who are working in organisations in the city, but also people who are living in our actual communities. This has included partners in the voluntary sector and in the private actual sector, and also working with the other members on the child poverty working group. This is to understand what people within our kind of whole system, within the wider system, actually think should be included in a framework that kind of has a whole systems approach to actually addressing actual poverty in Plymouth. And we've also been looking at, we've caught up now, so we're also looking at other sources of information which might also inform this. So this has included some work that's been done in the communities, so actually listening in kind of other areas, and also some of the work we've actually done as a council to understand what kind of the people who are living in Plymouth actually think about that experience of living in Plymouth, and the things which might drive an impact on poverty. As was mentioned earlier, we have a kind of a core aspect of this actual framework, which we've already agreed with with officers within the council, and also Cabinet, that we're looking at having an environment in Plymouth where the risk of falling into poverty is reduced, where for people who are already living in poverty, the actual ability of them to move themselves out of poverty is increased, and also where for those people who are living in poverty, the harm that is experienced as part of that is also actually oh, I can't speak. Sorry. That we also have a improving impact on that, on the impact of living in poverty, and the overarching aim of this is to understand the strategies and the policies within the council, but also the work of our wider partners and communities in terms of these areas. The kind of principles which are then actually guiding the actual development of the framework, and also how the framework is applied, is again those things which we often talk about within the work of the council. So looking at this whole systems approach, so it isn't all about what the council is actually doing for or to the communities, but how we work as a whole system within Plymouth. Looking across the whole of the life course. So often we've talked about poverty in terms of children, but actually children not existing in isolation. So it's thinking about how those interactions across the whole of the life course and between people at kind of all the different actual stages in the life course impact on poverty in Plymouth. looking at this from a trauma-informed kind of approach, so thinking about how living in poverty, how some of the experiences that people have who are living in poverty, but also wider experiences, may impact on how they interact with the world and interact with us. I think a core bit for us, although it's in this kind of wide principles, but a core aspect has been that we're actually co-producing this with partners, so with officers, with partners, and with people in the community. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing that work in this early engagement phase. We will also be actually continuing that on throughout the whole development of the framework. And we've also having links, obviously, I suppose for me coming from a public health perspective, into Thrive, Plymouth, and looking at those, the wider determinants of health and how those impact on poverty and on outcomes for people who are living in poverty. So then, if we move on to the actual core of the kind of that middle band of the framework, so the actual themes which have been emerging out of the work we're actually doing, engaging with our partners and with people in the communities, is that some of the aspects of this work will be about actually maximising income for people who are living in Plymouth, about actually strengthening our communities, and this isn't all about work which we do as a council, but also work which is happening within communities themselves and within the wider partnership. So to improve that experience of living in the communities, optimising. I can't speak. Sorry. Transport links within in Plymouth, within the city, so that people who are living within the communities of Plymouth are able to access work and healthcare and other opportunities. Optimising our local economies, and this is and from the things that I've heard from people who I've talked with in the communities, this is about optimising the economy for the whole of the city, but also having strong local economies for people who are kind of working and living in their local actual neighbourhoods. And then also improving access to and the quality of housing in Plymouth and in local areas. These are only some of the themes, and we're going to, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, we're going to do some work to explore some of the other themes which are arising out of this. We're at the end now, almost at the end of that kind of early engagement phase about understanding and hearing what people and what the community in Plymouth are thinking. So the next stages will be taking all that data that we've brought together, so from the work I've done to listen to people, but also from some of the wider pieces of work I mentioned earlier, which we'll also pull in, and then actually making some actual sense of that in terms of turning that into themes. And then in the actual continuation of our actual commitment to doing this in a co-produced way, we're going to be involving partners in that work. So we're looking at how they can interpret some of the data we've actually collected and turn that into the insight, which will then inform the actual themes. Alongside that work, we're also going to look at mapping the existing work, so the strategies and the policies within the council, but also work with the wider partners against those actual themes as they emerge. So we'll do some work with the actual sense making to capture that, but then after we have the themes, then we'll also go back and relook at all those pieces to match them up, to see actually where there are areas of strength which map with the themes which have emerged out of this work, but also where perhaps there's areas that would require extra work. And I think importantly, again, we need to emphasise this is a whole systems actual framework, so it's not all about things the council do. There are going to be themes which emerge which are things which happen outside of the council. Then we also need to, and this will also happen alongside some of the sense making, but also afterwards, is looking at how we actually develop some actual metrics for those, I can't speak, sorry, for the themes. So looking at how do we as a council understand how we're actually performing as a whole system in those areas. And we're going to be working with partners within the council and the communities to understand that. And then finally also looking at actually some of the governance aspects for this work. So thinking about how the child poverty advisory group fits in with this programme, and how this is used then to really look at how poverty is impacting on the experience of children in Plymouth. Just a little extra bit, I suppose, for me, is if you're interested in being involved in any of these actual stages, you're welcome to So email me and we can talk about how you might get involved or how we might kind of actually work with with people in your areas.
Thanks, Nick. I think obviously we're moving at a place where at the moment we're doing all of this, but national policy is changing, or at least some new approaches are being consulted on at the moment. We're still waiting for the consultations to come out on the government's child poverty work. There is stuff coming out at the moment around government has a call for evidence out on breaking down barriers to opportunities at work, which crosses between this and the public sector equalities duty, including consulting on commencing the socio-economic duty within the Equalities Act, which brings poverty within that remit as well. So we're watching what's going on at national government level, but at the same time, what we're saying is we know we have some issues in Plymouth, and we've been saying this now for a long time as a council. What can we as a council do, and what can we as a system do, and how can we make sure that while we're doing that, we latch on to what government is doing in order to lever any resource that might be coming out of that to support the work of ourselves and our partners in the city. So, there's a quick overview of where we're at, but as you can see, it's trying to put that into a written report would have taken quite a lot of time that's being spent at the moment in other things, and we didn't want to leave it until we got to the end stage without having engaged in scrutiny during the process. So we just thought this point where we're going back to Cabinet was a good time to come to you. So it's really, unless Maria's got anything specific to say, it's over to you and we'll do our best.
Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Riley.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and thank you, councillors and Nick, for being here this afternoon. I think actually, Councillor Penberthy, it's sometimes better to do what you've done, actually come and have a sort of verbal update, and obviously for members to interact. I wanted, if I may, just pick up on the metrics piece and the quantification of poverty. And, it is worthy to note, as you mentioned, Councillor Penberthy, that this has been something that's been ongoing for a very long time. Is it likely that in the subsequent documentation you provide for Cabinet and Council that you'll do a short sort of synopsis of what's happened between the point of 2011, 2012 and now in terms of what's been achieved in a very high level approach? But for the metrics, I think it would be very useful for the wider council to appreciate what the aspirations are, but to quantify perhaps the numbers of people that who are in Plymouth in poverty at the time you write your report, and then when you quantify metrics for the future, what we anticipate the numbers to be in the future. I think all of us would like effectively there to be no poverty, but the reality is that probably will never be something we'll see in our lifetime. And no doubt, perhaps a sceptic in me, if government are reviewing a policy, it might dumb down potentially, the quantification of poverty. Clearly, we've had a period of high inflation, cost of living pressures, which would have had an impact on relative poverty in the city. And I think it would be really important to have sort of numbers and whether there's the option of perhaps mapping it across the 20 wards in Plymouth, so we have a general idea of, we know the poorer wards, but generally all of us have appreciation of poverty in our respective areas would be very useful. Thank you.
So I'll pick up, I'm sure Nick will pick up on explicit metrics. What's been achieved is going to be in some ways quite difficult. When we started work on child poverty, and Councillor Samantha Leaves was the portfolio holder at the time, shows how long ago we've been working on this and how it has been very cross-party. We had actually a statutory duty to address child poverty. That was sadly removed by Ian Duncan Smith when he was the minister, but also took us out of actually measuring child poverty in the country, which means that even all those international approaches, we're no longer able to work with in the same way. It's taken a bit of time, therefore, to come up with agreed, sort of informally agreed metrics, and what those tend to now be are absolute and relative low incomes. And we know that in Plymouth we have too many people with absolute low incomes and too many people with relative low incomes. Very happy when we get to formalise this a bit, to put some of that in as sort of technical appendix and how we measure. That is actually quite important from the economic strategy perspective, because in the economic strategy, we've made it very clear that we wish in the next 10 years to lift 10,000 people out of poverty in Plymouth. Sorry, 3,000 households out of poverty in Plymouth, which will be about 10,000 people. Those 3,000 households, we've started to do work on the principle of you put most of your effort into the sort of 80-20 rule. And we have been discovering some really disturbing information about women and employment, which we shared with the child poverty group recently. I know, Councillor Finn, you were subbing in that. At headline, if you take the average man's hourly rate of pay in the city and the average woman's hourly rate of pay in the city, there is more than £4 difference in it. It's 21% difference in pay. If you were to take the national median wage and apply that to Plymouth, 50% of men earn more and 50% of men earn less. So for men, we're about where we would expect to be. It'd be great if we had more earning more and less earning less. For women, 20% earn more and 80% earn less. If we were to look at the National Living Wage Foundation's rate as a national living wage, rather than the government rate, which we've been doing as a council, once again, for many years, over many administrations, sadly, 50% of women in Plymouth earn less than that. So we see that one of the big things that we're going to have to target through all of this, with the economic strategy, is how we support women to earn more. That means there'll be stuff on women's skills, there'll be stuff on childcare, there'll be stuff on glass ceilings and flexible working, and this is going to have to be working with the private sector and public sector employees. But this is where we're beginning to join up and beginning to delve into data. And so when we begin to set the KPIs on this and the metrics, these are the sorts of things that we're going to be looking at. And we're going to be looking at what those metrics are being caught up in other areas, and where the learning we do might then need to go back across owners of other strategies to say, where does this fit with what you're doing, and how are you going to help us achieve something around that? So we're not taking this as a standalone piece of work. What we're doing with this is a facilitation, enabling, coordinating, informing piece of work across lots of other stuff that's going on. But we do think that actually that whole issue of women's pay in the city could be really important, not just for now, but if you think that means women are putting less aside in pensions. Women are quite often the people who are left to deal with care for children and for older generations. That will impact their ability to do that on a long-term basis as well. So the knock-on impacts in lots of other areas of Plymouth are going to be really important. And the model that girls and young women see is of women being in this situation rather than women fulfilling the potential that they have because they're held back by the system in Plymouth. One of the reasons we're talking about that is we do less well in Plymouth than some of our peer cities. And we want to understand why Southampton and Portsmouth do better than we do on that, because those are going to be important things. So there's that. I think just to give you that sort of context as to where we're thinking, because I think that discussion about thinking is really important at the moment. But Nick, you'll probably want to pick up on how we're going to measure and metric.
So I think it's, so at the minute we have a pack which we use in the child poverty working group, which explores quite a range of metrics about, particularly around actual child poverty in Plymouth. I think one of the impacts of this work will be an opportunity to have a look at how that report is actually structured and some of the things we talk about. And my kind of thoughts around this will be actually using the actual themes which will arise out of this in the framework to then actually structure that kind of pack. And I think it's important that we, and kind of we do a bit at the minute, but it's important we look at some of those and at the metrics from a couple of different perspectives. So looking at what the drivers are of poverty in Plymouth, so having some of the metrics on that, having metrics on the impacts. So those things which kind of we're talking about that, how many people are living in poverty, how many children are living in poverty, but also some of the actual things that are happening, some of our actual processes within the council, but also wider. So some of the things about how many people are accessing some of the services, how many people are accessing some of the benefits, and actually pulling together those. We are going to need to do some work to understand kind of what actual data is available. We don't want to have to do a whole load of new work just to make metrics for us to look at. So I think it's about trying to pull together actual data we have across the whole system, which is already in existence, and we're going to do some work as part of the sense making to understand where data is, so the people who are involved in that process will be able to feed in about where they think some of the data is that would answer questions around that. And we'll also do some work with our teams in the council to understand, actually where the data is. If you have any thoughts about particular things you'd like to see, you're welcome to email for that. Is that okay? Does that answer your?
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
Yeah, 'cause just to put some context into it, one thing we did look at with the child poverty was obviously one was to, especially with regard to women and women's income, was if one looks back to the 80s, obviously you had the likes of Texas Instruments, Earlhart, Bank Bush, Toshiba, Farley's. A lot of women were in work, and therefore there was a good wage take. If you look at the dockyard back then, we know for a fact it was 14,000. When I went in, there was 14,700 people in there. So is it economic now that the jobs don't exist? How is that poverty derived? I suppose that is a metric of there and now historically, that we had a high wage base going back to the 80s, and how did we come to have a low wage base now? And is it an economic argument as well? So just to put it into context historically and measuring metrics, is there a historical context with regard to the low wages now? Is it a lower wage economy and they're paying lower? I know, for example, my first job at Texas Instruments was 3 shifts. It was predominantly female. The ladies actually working within that industry, within that factory. So you had 3 shifts of a very high and well-paid jobs, for example. So what do we need to do possibly economically as a city to drive women's wages up by providing higher and better and well-paid jobs? I don't know. So I think that's something that's going to be addressed eventually. Zoe?
Probably need to let me have a breather. Imagine talking about women's and then giving me a mic.
You've got 2 minutes.
I know. Can we have a timer? So, yeah, women's income is very much where we're looking at poverty. It is. We do a lot with it. We do a lot with our time. We do a lot with our money. And I say that in good company because the regular members of this board, there's one there, there's one here, and there's a female officer there. So we'll just acknowledge that. I work with young people, not in Plymouth. I work with young people across Devon and wider. And they are all in households of poverty. They are all struggling, every single one of them. So this is super important. Like, it's really important. It's really emotive for me. It's very, very, very important to me. What I want to know is, at what point, so you obviously have a light bulb moment, Nick, at some point say, that's where we're going to go and that's what we're going to do. What happened there and where is it reaching to? So all the people that will be watching this now to listen to what I say, what are people going to hear and understand, those people that we're talking about? Not KPIs, not all that sort of stuff. People who we're representing, what will they understand from the work you're doing now?
If I can go first, we've been there isn't a specific light bulb moment. There have been discussions and just going on for quite a long time based on gut feelings. And there's actually, whilst we've had child poverty stuff going on, and that was triggered by a report in 2011, which identified there were parts of Plymouth with, at that point, over 50% of the children living in poverty. And we felt that that was unacceptable. And as a council, we agreed that we were going to do something that was more than government was going to ask of us. So we've begun to ask questions. That's led to us talking about children and dental health, because we started asking questions. It's led to us talking about food sustainability and why we've got food co-ops in Plymouth at the moment, and 2 social supermarkets opening, because we've talked about what that means. It's why we continually change the way the household support fund works in order to do better. It's why we're now doing specialist housing for young people within the homelessness system that isn't just a bed, but is self-contained flats, and we're going to have 48 of them opening in Plymouth House soon. So we've got lots of things, so there's not necessarily one light bulb moment. The discussion about women started within the context of inclusive growth in economic development, with conversations I was having about why our major employers, which used to be lots of industrial employers who employed lots of women, were now employers that employed lots of men. So Babcock's male heavy, Princess Yachts, you have to work really hard to find women working in the Princess Yachts environment. And actually, so the skills that were in Texas and Bush and Calumet, and in places like Jaeger, have moved. And so it was like, we've seen a shift. We haven't got any data. How do we begin to explore this to a point where we feel confident to be able to go public and say we have a city issue? That has been led with discussions between politicians, quite often in the child poverty group, in free-flowing conversations that have asked questions that we have explored. And that's what's led us to a point of we can no longer talk about child poverty and fuel poverty and period poverty and food poverty. And sorry, I can't cope with a poverty portfolio which has me doing 8 or 9 different poverty strategies. And I'm not prepared to do a strategy that's based on poverty, which is a negative, when what we know is we need to equip people to be able to take the steps to the opportunities that we have in the city, where we have high value jobs coming into the city, where we have a growth agenda in the city. I don't want to see the people I represent still in the same position in 20 years' time when we've seen billions of pounds worth of growth come into the city and shipping people in. So the light bulb moment has actually been a growing sense that we've now got facts, that not all the facts, but facts that underpin this isn't good enough. And it's not just me. We've been talking, and actually there's a sense from the Child Poverty Advisory Group, it's not good enough. From officers, it's not good enough. And from partners, it's not good enough. So that it's not one, but it's as we've begun to pool. And I think that's been what's really important in driving this agenda and getting buy-in before we went and launched it 6 months ago, to make sure that it wouldn't just be the council saying, oh, we're going to do something and we've ticked a box, but actually we've got a buy-in. So in some ways, I think Nick might be able to answer for some of him, but that context is, it's actually been a bit more fundamental than waking up one morning and getting in the shower and thinking, oh, why doesn't this add up? I think it's sort of that gut feeling that we've been just trying to prove. Technical rather than more political leadership.
Do you want a personal actual story, or do you just want or would you like a comment on the approach?
The reason I ask is because when we do this work, so us as politicians here, we want to do good stuff. We want to make things right for people. But those people who do the actual work, who shift the stuff, who sweep the floors and wipe the windows, those are the people that do it for a reason. My point is, when I see my young people, I see a lot of I'm a domestic abuse coordinator. I work with those young people, and at the heart of most of their cases is poverty. somewhere along the line there is poverty, whether it's historic, whether it's just happened, whether it's COVID related. Either way, there is some form of poverty, and so that is why this is important to me, because the young people that I deal with have that. So I just wonder sometimes when people put so much effort into something, what is it? And that will make me understand where we're going to go with it, if that makes sense.
So I will give a short personal thing. So I had actually had actually trained as a doctor originally. So I've come into public health out of medicine. I trained here in Plymouth, and then I worked in the Midlands in COVID, and I worked in Stoke-on-Trent. And if any of you know Stoke-on-Trent, it's a similar sort of actual context to Plymouth. So such Stoke had a historic heavy industry in the potteries, which is now kind of almost non-existent. So there's a kind of a small handful of actual potteries which are still working in Stoke, but they've moved on. And there is some other heavy industry, kind of heavy to mid industry there, but there's been a huge actual shift in working patterns in Stoke, which has also then actually led to a large proportion of the population who are living in deprivation. And my experience working in the hospital in Stoke was that people were being admitted to hospital for they had medical issues, but the medical issues were being, the health concerns were being driven by the actual context they're actually living in. So I worked on a surgical ward, and we had a large number of people who were admitted for amputations of limbs, largely due to IV drug use, so people who'd had abscesses, had infections, then having limbs amputated, but who were still, we would have people who would bring drugs into the hospital, people would use in hospital, people would be trying to leave hospital to use, people were still heavily smoking. I would, people who'd had their legs amputated, I'd be, actually taking them out in their wheelchair to the outside so they could have a smoke. So all these things which we know are strongly linked to living deprivation, I could really actually see them there. I was having that first-hand kind of, not first-hand impact, but that first-hand observation of that impact of living in poverty. And actually nobody, when they're 14 or 15, they don't wake up in the morning and think, oh, I know what I want to be when I'm 30 as a heroin addict. Nobody thinks that. Nobody actually sets out for that. So I think that experience of seeing those health impacts and people's that kind of early impact on like an amputation is a huge thing. That's not a small health impact. That impact on early death, all driven by by actually living in deprivation, by experiencing actual poverty. It's a huge drive of all those things. And actually, if we can address that really upstream thing of living in poverty, of experiencing that, if we can address that, then actually that'll have a huge impact on health outcomes, which is what, as a doctor, what I was kind of really thinking about. It'll have that impact, and we can actually improve health outcomes for people in Plymouth by stress and poverty, but we can also address all those other things that'll actually make it much pleasant for people in Plymouth to actually live in Plymouth if they're not living in poverty. So I think from a personal perspective, that's my kind of driver into public health in a way. From a kind of operational perspective, I think the important bit of this work is that we are thinking about a whole systems approach. So there is a thing which could address a poverty altogether, but that's something that would have to happen at the whole society actual level. If we could sort out, So I think yes, and I think that's so we could there is in theory we could address poverty at that very highest level. That's not something we can do in our system at the local actual level, because of that, there isn't any one thing or even any group of things we can do as a council that would actually address poverty in its entirety in Plymouth. And I think then because of that, we then know that actually taking that whole systems approach, actually working with all our partners, with the communities, that's the way we can address all those areas of poverty in the city. But we need to do it as a whole city. Thank you.
I think your question, what will it mean to people, is that building bridges to opportunity is not really a public-facing project. Building bridges to opportunity is about us and our partners joining things up, avoiding duplication, making sure we cover as much as possible, and that we're as thoughtful as possible when we deliver things. So, you know, if I think, yesterday I was at the opening of a social supermarket. Building bridges to opportunity means nothing to the members of that social supermarket. However, the members of that social supermarket will be accessing affordable food. They will be building relationships. They'll get involved in helping to run the social supermarket, which will build skills and confidence and might well take them away from their current low skill, low wage, hourly paid job to something that's better. I know, having met one of the women a few times who's a member, she comes in each week and she doesn't buy basics. She manages her basics on her income. She comes in and buys some muffin mix. So on a Saturday morning, she can make some muffins with her kids. And she buys some treats for the kids with her points. And for her, what the social supermarket means is her kids are able to lead a life more like the kids everywhere else. To me, that's a really important outcome of here, but it's because we're joining up. You know, this morning, Matt and I were talking about cold and damp and the work that we're doing with public health and with PEC and with other partners on how we improve housing conditions in the city. To me, someone who's living in a cold, damp home at the moment who ends up living in a warm, dry and hopefully mould-free home is a real positive outcome. They don't need to know about building bridges to opportunity. What they need to know is that we've been joining up health and housing and the Household Support Fund and the work of Plymouth Energy Community, who chair that task force for us, to make a difference. And actually, for your young people, a flat in Plymouth House is going to be much better than a bed in a hostel. And they need to know that they've got that and the support, not that we've got a strategy. So, you know, what will it mean to people for me is actually about the difference it makes to people out there. What it means to policymakers, to decision makers, to business owners and shareholders in the city is that we're joining it up and we're thinking not just about hitting a box, but we're thinking about how we act together for the good of Plymouth. And so, in some ways, I don't accept the premise of your question that was that people out there in Plymouth need to know about this.
Sorry, I didn't mean that. I meant, could you explain to me in a way that isn't numbers, because I need to be explained to in not numbers. Not that people should know it. Your explanation was absolutely what I was asking for. That was perfect, thank you.
My question is around, you spoke, Chris, about not being public facing and the opportunity to feed into potentially future government thinking. So I'm aware of work being done in the city by Citizens Advice and the university around the two-child policy. What opportunities have you had to be able to work with them on addressing the research and the findings that they've made?
Thank you. I'm aware of the work. I think Citizens Advice do some amazing work and we use their data very heavily. The university do some work that is also very amazing. When we looked at what that set of recommendations were for us, actually there weren't many, but also the database, it was very much about individual conversations. That's a really good way of doing research. If you're trying to do some of the bits that change national government policy, actually the research base and the methodology was right for the piece of work they wanted to do. It wasn't necessarily right for changing government policy. And we are reacting to government consultations rather than lobbying for changes on massive scale, because they are two different things. However, there are people involved in Plymouth doing lots of stuff like that who are putting things in. We will look at it from this perspective in terms of what we're doing within the city. So there are benefits within the city that we have control of. So what do we do with council tax support? How do we promote free school meals? What does it mean on some of those bits like disabled facilities grants and hardship awards that we have responsibility for? So we've shaped the Household Support Fund on the basis of the evidence that we have received through the previous 6 rounds. And that's where we are concentrating this. When it comes to government consultations, we will respond to government consultations. If it comes for lobbying to change government policy per se, that would need to be done predominantly through people outside the council, especially when there's a big national issues that we would need to have a very strong evidence base on. And I think I read the report, but the report that was produced wasn't one that could substantively influence our local policy and thinking, but it was one that was done by Citizens Advice in the university without engaging with us and thinking about this. And it's one of a number of reports that get done, because one of the things the university really kindly does is it says to organisations in Plymouth, if you want to explore something, come and tell us, and if we've got some research capacity, we'll do that for you. So actually that's something that's available to lots of community groups. They do lots of work with it. It's quite often to help them fund and put together funding bids. It's not necessarily research that's about systemic change. And I think if we're doing that, those are the sorts of bigger data sets that actually Citizens Advice are involved with us, which is informing our cold damp work. It is informing how we spend Household Support Fund. And as we finalise the details on that, you will see there's some quite major changes this year, which are being done because of the input from people like Citizens Advice. So we will be responding to the current government consultations. They're not at the moment asking us about 2 child caps. We'll respond to those. What we'll respond to is not, is the policy right or wrong? We'll respond to, this is the impact of that policy proposal in Plymouth. This is how we've mapped it. This is the implication of that. If you're going to do this, we can support by offering this, but please can you give us X, Y, and Z in order that we can do the things that support the people in Plymouth to be able to deliver. So we will take as a council that type of approach. And I think within building bridges to opportunity, that's quite important because of the partnerships that we're seeking to build to make this happen, and we're not seeking to control. So Citizens Advice working with the university might well want to do something and go off, and that's perfectly fine. We'll be building some really solid databases of information that is citywide and able to be checked. So things like the low income family tracker, parity, other data sources that we've got that are citywide will be the ones that we use to build the arguments. And I quite often talk now about data and anecdata. And the anecdotal stories can be really good. It's very difficult to build a whole policy on the anecdotal. And that's why we didn't start talking about women's issues 6 or 7 years ago, when we started trying to begin where could we even get the data to understand it. We've waited till we actually had some really firm figures and some comparators before we went really public on it. So it's not a no, it's not a yes. It's more where we see we're sitting on this and how we support and enable other people to do what they need to do, because every single organisation involved in building bridges to opportunity as it rolls out will all have their organisational agendas and things they're trying to achieve. What we want to achieve through it is the differences we can make here in the city and the actions we can take here in the city. And actually, that is about families earning enough for child benefit not to be the breaking point, but to be there to support children. And that means, in reality, that women aren't earning enough in the city. And that's why child benefit is such an issue. We could do something about women's earnings. We can do something about women's employment opportunities. We can do stuff about childcare. And that's where I think we're trying to focus on the really practical things that we can do. So it was a sort of political question, so you've got a sort of political answer. But I'm trying really hard on this not to play party politics, because this is a project that we have worked on cross-party effectively since 2011, where councillors said we are taking control of some of this, as much control as councillors ever have, but we're going to have oversight and we're going to have input into citywide systems. We're not just going to leave it to bumble along and just tick the boxes when we come to write reports for national government. And I think it's really important that as a council, we continue to get buy-in for us being consistent on this, because I think the consistency of voice really matters in the long term and in the planning, because actually we're asking Plymouth systems to change, not on the basis of an election result, but on the basis of a conviction from council as a whole, with consistent messaging from whoever sits with my portfolio responsibility. And I think, heads up to everyone that's done it since 2011, actually we have managed to do that fairly consistently. And I think that's something that's really important to me. So I'm putting aside, when I'm doing this, quite a lot of what might be my personal beliefs in order to try and support the city moving forward.
I've only got one quick question, and Councillor Cuddly and
Councillor Cuddly, that sounds nice.
So I'm having a bad day. I'm looking forward to Easter. Cuddy. Yeah, that's all right. We all have a bad day. Just one quick one for me. Is access to education going to be part of the framework? And then Councillor Cuddy.
Yes, as we said, what we're going to be doing is we're going to look at all the Plymouth Plan policies that relate to anything across this agenda, at the same time that we're looking at the experience we've had that Nick's just talked about. Skills are key. Education is key, from early years through to adult and continuing. And actually, unless we're going to say we're prepared to lapse economic growth in the city and addressing this until people in preschool now are old enough to be working in careers, we're missing a trick. So it's not only about preschool now, it's also about what routes to adult education and skills development, what's the role of apprentices. This will all be fitting together, it will all come together. So, it's one of the key ones in there we've already talked about. It's a key one in the economic strategy, and we've already started having conversations in terms of with skills people about, okay, we've got to focus on women for inclusive growth. What does that mean for the skills strategy? How do you begin to develop that? What do you need? And we're beginning to understand that means we need to go back a step to do some work on asset-based community development type approaches with women, so that women feel that actually it's okay to get some skills, to earn some more money, because if you live in a community where it's not the norm, you're being asked to break the rules. So we're even looking, when it comes to access to education, what do we need to do in order to help people even think about accessing education? We're taking long-term views on this, not quick fixes.
Yeah, thanks. Chris, I think you and Nick have both very, very briefly touched on resources, and I just want to try and understand a little bit more about that. I've no issue with your objectives. They're honourable, laudable, well worthy of this committee's support. But just thinking about some of those objectives, things like trying to encourage better uptake of benefits. I can see, for instance, that the CAB might have a role in that, by they employ and can employ more benefits advisors, for instance. But I'm interested in what your thinking is about the kind of resources that the council needs to operate this long-running project with a series of really important objectives. So I'm thinking, for instance, you talk about on the slides, one of the objectives is optimising transport connectivity. Well, we all know as councillors what the cost of a new bus service is, for instance. You touched on the potential for central government to contribute money. That might come, for instance, in you know, an example of that might be the fleet of electric buses, you know, train upgrades, that kind of thing. You spoke about housing quality, you know, having better quality developments, that kind of thing. There might be private providers, but some of them might not agree entirely with what we want. You know, this sounds like A, resource intensive in terms of extra staff and extra commitment from the council. B, the council might need to deploy resources with partners, i.e. contributing further to the CAB, that kind of thing. So I'm just interested in what your thinking is about those resources, whether you think the resources for this project will largely come from central government, or whether further room within the council's budget needs to be made. You know, for instance, further decisions down the line. I know, for instance, the council's, you know, you're managing a project of disposal of various land, you know, that the council owns. You know, whether there might be more, whether there might be further resources available through that or other similar projects. I just wonder what your thinking and Nick's thinking is about resources, please.
In some ways, we'll have a better idea once we've done some more work on it. But what we did say was this isn't creating a new programme. So for building bridges to opportunity, actually, it's some analyst time, some public health consultant and other officer time who are already working on something like it. Some of our time and Maria's out and about talking to people, beginning to meet partnerships and other stuff. So the time I don't have, if you've been a cabinet member, you know that you've got an enormous portfolio and you can't do absolutely everything. If only I could make some more. And that's why roles of champions are really important. And I think, you know, one of our long-standing ones in terms of Pauline and Armed Forces, the work that Pauline actually got going has enabled all of us in a number of administrations. You know, the work that Zoe, you did as part of VORG was more than any cabinet member would have had time to do. So champions are really important in some of that. If we were to talk about, say, damp, mould, cold, it's really important here. And we were talking this morning about how we resource the task force, which is a partnership, and that's about some resourcing of secretariat and so on. In order to help address that, Plymouth Energy Community are bringing in all sorts of funding. We're bringing in funding, we're tying that up. The information that's leading to the work is being informed by Citizens Advice and by PEC and by our housing team and by our public health team. We're now talking about what do we do with the Household Support Fund. And we haven't yet given the full details of what we're going to do, but as a bit of a preview, in the past, there has to be public availability to access some of the money. That's been opening of an online form at 8 o'clock in the morning, and once it's all spent, it's spent. If people can tick the boxes. That's not a particularly good way of working out whether we're meeting need or anything else. This time, working with Citizens Advice and PEC, the advisors that we are already paying, because most of those advisors locally are paid for by us, will be doing triaging first, so that rather than 95% of people who receive money never getting support, everyone will get some support. If they need the money, they'll get the money, they'll get signposting. The new work that's happening with the Renters' Rights Bill will mean the Register of Landlords means we can track landlords' addresses against the work we've got on the Low Income Family Tracker and Parity, which is on housing quality, and we can say, we know some people for whom damp and mould and low income and now landlord are a problem. We're doing the first two already. And I was told this morning that South West Landlords had had a phone call from a landlord whose tenant had contacted them to say they'd been contacted, whether it was us or one of our partners, to say, we think that you might be living in a home that's a bit damp and cold. You might have some mould issues. We think you might not be getting as many benefits as you're entitled to. We think that you might need some other support. And they were checking with the landlord whether it was genuine. The landlord checked with South West Landlords, who checked with us and went back and it was like, wow, this is really good. So we know that the tracking we're already doing, so we're working smarter. So it's not that it's new things, we're using data to inform the work that we're already spending. And that means that if we need to spend more, we're coming in with really good business cases talking about how it might be met. In terms of land sales, we know that we need to invest some more money in children's provision in the city. Well, to meet the capital costs, we've got capital assets that we're not using. How do we release within the capital programme headroom to deliver the things that we know we need to do in order to improve the lives of other service users? So actually all of this, it's why we're trying to take an overview and system view, and then individual departments of the council, partners, everyone else will all take a view. If we need to bid for money, we'll bid for money. If a government programme comes up and we've got an oven-baked scheme ready to go, it's great. Our asks and offers, well, if we say to government, you've got this issue, we offer to do this for you if you can give us this. It's just us being ready, and at the moment we're not necessarily. Mark has been great, Mark Coker, at getting road investment and bus investment because we worked with our partners and we had a ready product. So this will help us do all of that. And if we need to do tweaking of budgets, we'll have evidence that's been talked about in scrutiny at high level and in specific scrutiny panels and in other places, and we can then say we know why we're doing that budget change. So we don't have enough money, we'll never have enough money, but what we can do is help prioritise and prioritise with people understanding.
All right, Councillor Boyes, last one on this, and we'll be closing this one.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it fairly brief. I think tackling this as a whole system is probably the only way we can actually tackle poverty within city. Just following on from Councillor Cuddy's remark around resourcing, and I've also heard the term asset building, community development used. I think it's probably important to acknowledge how useful that as a tool can be and how the council sees its role within that as well, working alongside partners. I know that it will take probably a lead in this, but its positioning is really important to bring people alongside, so we're all going in the same direction. The resourcing aspect of that is really important as well for working with communities. We know that if we get that wrong, if we can make we can cause some real damage in communities as well. So we need to make sure that if we're practicing ABCD, we're putting the time and the resource and putting trained people within our partners to address that. So, for example, we know that trust, for example, can walk in, takes time to build trust, doesn't it? But it can actually go out like a bolting horse when we get it wrong. So there's a real strong emphasis on that, and I'd like just to draw attention to that. We probably need more trained ABCD officers and people within our communities to actually look at working alongside probably the most vulnerable people within our city as well. So I know, Chris, you've probably got some experience in this already, but I'd heard the term mentioned several times, and I just wanted to draw that out a little bit more.
So before it was even known as ABCD, and it was other small group youth work, even before appreciative inquiry and so on, I was doing small group youth work, which was youth-led back in the 1980s in Brixton in London. So it's been part of my working practice before I knew what the language as the sort of the body of evidence build. You know, in terms of appreciative inquiry, the work that we've been doing through public health here that led to development of things like the Alliance is nationally recognised, and we are exemplars on it. In terms of ABCD, we are leading that in the city as well. And in fact, I was at a Health and Wellbeing Board meeting recently where I was talking about this because we have secured funding from the ICB, which supports ABCD approaches in the city. It's the approach the entire community builders team is working on, the entire team that's working on strengthening communities and community engagement works from that basis, and are building an ABCD sort of school of practice across the city, not just funded by us. So we are talking to others as well. So the development of food co-ops has been done through an ABCD approach. The work that we've been doing on the social supermarket yesterday, there were 3 community builders there, bringing different perspectives to supporting that social supermarket in terms of citywide approaches for vulnerable communities. So we're talking about it because we've already started doing it, and we're seeing the difference it makes, and we know that that's one of the ways that we can not just do top down, but we can support people bottom up to be able to have the voices they need to have, or to have the confidence to approach the things they need to do, and to actually do small things that change the communities they're already in. As an example of that, there was not going to be a family hub in Stonehouse. We haven't got a wellbeing hub either. And we talked about it, and with some of the community builders, we've now got a family collective in Stonehouse that's anchored in the Children's Centre and doing loads more from an ABCD AI trauma-informed approach. So we're actually doing it already, and that's why we feel confident to put it in as part of the approach. That's led through public health, through Zoe Siblman's team, and links into all our work on food security and financial security, support for the voluntary community sector and social enterprises in terms of non-financial business development support for the social enterprises, but the liaison support. So it's sort of sitting there in all of that, and all the work we do leading on volunteering in the city. So it's been strategically thought about, and it's joining that up. So community builders, we've already been talking to community builders about how we're changing our approaches so that they're aware that this is coming down the road.
Needless to say, thank you all for your contribution, Nick, Chris and Maria, with regard to this. It's been an enlightening conversation and certainly informative. Keep up the good work. I'm sure I say it on behalf of all the committee, and we look forward to you reporting back at some stage in the future with some great news and positive news that we are making that difference. Thank you again.
And if at all possible, Chair, before we get to taking a final paper to Cabinet on direction forward, if it is possible for us to come and run it past you before we finalise that as part of the process. Obviously, we would take it to the Cabinet Advisory Group, but that'll be later this year. We can work on timings with the officers, but I would really appreciate the chance to come back and do a sense check before we do that.
Absolutely, I raise no objections to that. And has anybody else got any input with regard to that? And we look forward to you bringing that back before us in due course. Thank you very much for your time. Needless to say, from the committee point of view, it's just the recommendation is just to note the verbal report. So I now come on to item 6, which is public sector equalities duty compliance, pages 7 to 22 in your report. Councillor Penworthy for Housing and Cooperative Development will introduce the report, and Councillor Penrose, welcoming City Champion Sarah Gooding, Policy and Intelligence Advisor, will be in attendance to support. The purpose of the report is to respond to the request from the Housing and Community Services Scrutiny Panel to scrutinise the Council's public sector equality duty compliance.
Thank you, Chair. Just scroll back to my other bit. And I appreciate you picking up these two bits that have been sitting around for a while and we think are really important, and actually it's quite nice to have a bit more time. And I know you've got a written report here, and that's actually the update report we also provided to Cabinet recently in order to ensure that we did the annual report, which we have to do in March. We have to, I'm sorry, joined today by Councillor Angela Penrose, who is our champion for welcoming city. That's one of the strands within public sector equalities duty, but has a sort of overarching perspective, something we've been doing as a council since 2012, once again across administrations, on making the city a great place for everyone to live, to work and to relax and enjoy themselves. So that sort of equalities, diversity, inclusion, cohesion piece, which isn't, once again, not something that's all about the council, it's all about the city. So a lot of work there outside. And Sarah from the policy team in the Chief Exec's office, who's also been working with us on building bridges to opportunity, but she's joining us just for this session this afternoon. If I do a quick overview, give Angela a quick opportunity just to reflect on anything she'd like to reflect on the last year. Sarah might want to come in, but we're happy to answer questions. Obviously, you've had the report. I'm not going to rehash what you've had in front of you. It'd be fair to say it's been a busy year, because last year when we set the next 4-year objectives under the public sector equalities duty, we decided not to populate it with loads of stuff that was business as usual. It's very easy to do that, to have a few headlines, do business as usual and say, yes, we've done stuff. That actually doesn't help us do anything. It just means that we do what we've always been doing and we report on it. Well, to me, that seems a bit of a waste of time. So we said, actually, where are the areas that we could make some real change in approach? Not necessarily spend a fortune of money, but actually change the way we work on things. And we had some conversations, I had some conversations with my fellow cabinet members, and we identified at the time that council had approved that we should adopt care experience as a protected characteristic. Well, the public sector equalities duty is about ensuring we deal with all the things that are national protected characteristics. So we decided we needed a whole work stream on the changes necessary for that to become business as usual. And that piece of work is led by Jemima, by officers in children's services, and by our corporate parenting group. So, you can see it's not about us doing it. We said that actually we wanted to be a really good employer. We wanted to model good employment practices and what that meant. And we could tick loads of boxes, but it was like, how could we work to improve employment? Sudan, Chris Squires and their team lead on that. Under a previous iteration of this, we developed staff networks, but we've not really done very much with it or with those. Now those staff networks are developing more, and wasn't it great that the Neurodiversity Staff Network hosted a citywide conference here in the Council House not that many weeks ago as a real result of how we're supporting people. So that piece of work went under. We knew that hate crime needed to be addressed. We want more people to report. That means we get more hate crime reported. We also want to deal with the implications of it. This is very much outside our control, but it's something that the Community Safety Partnership does have a lead on. And so Sally Hayden with Tracy Naismith has been leading on that work with the Community Safety Partnership. And it's been, what are the changes necessary? So what we've been reporting on here are how we're doing things that change. In the first year, to settle that in, we said we'd do a one-year action plan that was about some action, but also the things that we needed structurally to do to change the way we did that. As things become business as usual, they will be knocked off and more things will be added. So we did that first year. We're currently now almost at the end of doing the next action plan, which will be a 3-year action plan with a focus on year 1, so that we can take some long-term decisions about how we move these things forward. Those are being worked up with Angela, Sarah, Caroline, who can't be with us today, and Lucy, who can't be with us today, and myself, meeting with those other cabinet members and their senior leads and teams, sitting down and saying, where's our ambition? Where could we go? What can we transform? Being supportively critical friends of each other in trying to drive the council and our role in the city. So that's what we've been doing. You've got the plan on what we've done. Obviously, having set all of this up, on August the 5th, there was a riot in the city centre. And that changed a lot of people's perceptions about the city across a whole range of different communities and understandings. We flexed, we delivered on that. The funding we got from government, the vast majority of it went to 42 community-based organisations to deliver on change and to help us through that process. So I think what we've also set in place is something that is a flexible process and something that is engaging with the community. The 4th strand we set up was about welcoming city, which is less about what we do as a council and more about our role of facilitating equalities, diversity, inclusion, community cohesion being something that the city is able to celebrate. And there's a lot of work we do with community groups to support that in a wide variety of ways. So that's what we've been doing. Angela might quickly like to reflect on just her perceptions of the first just over a year of being the champion and the relationship she's been building. And Sarah might want to come in on some technical stuff if I've made any mistakes, and she can put me right.
Thank you, Chris. Well, you've said an awful lot. I would just like to mention as you see in the report, we have this group, the leads on equality, diversity, inclusion in other institutions, firms, and in the university, the hospital. We meet with them quite regularly. And that, to me, that's been, I think, the most valuable part of this, learning what they're up against, what they're finding, and we share. And it really is sharing experience. I found that extremely useful. And we've had, as we described there, 2 round tables with them, which, again, they've come and we've worked through issues with them. And very recently, we had one where we had the regional officer from Prevent talk to us, if you like, as Chris says, in the aftermath of that riots and how it's changed our perceptions. And that brought out some extraordinary things in the discussions afterwards with these critical friends and other EDI leaders. For example, I was absolutely staggered to believe here that, you know, in the hospital, they've had quite a number of incidents involving racial abuse. And what it's doing is people coming to Plymouth thinking what a welcoming city it is, are actually leaving because they feel exposed here because of their race and nationality. So what is, I think, so useful is to bring people together who are confronting those sort of issues so that we can work together on how on earth we can deal with that. As you can see, it's important to deal with that. On an upbeat note, Chris and I have become involved, deeply involved, pulled down into the organisation of the monthly international dinner, which meets at the Sherwell Church, and we have always over 100 people come, and often we actually have 20 or 30 nationalities. People bring their dishes, we share experiences and have singing, dancing, poetry, all sorts of things. So that's a very positive thing. So as I say, I think we're learning all the time, and it's extremely valuable to bring these people together. I'm learning all the time. Again, this meeting we had last week, we put the whole issue of the care leavers, people with care experience, to these other groups. And it was quite remarkable how almost none of them had ever thought about it. They had no idea how you would deal with it in recruitment or even work experience. So again, it set a lot of people thinking around the city, which, as Chris is saying, is what we're here to do, get people working together, thinking together.
Sarah's got anything to share.
Yeah, Angela, can you turn your mic on? That's right. No, thank you for that introduction. Is there any questions from the panel, please?
I don't know whether Sarah's got anything to say,
Oh,
Chair.
sorry.
She's sitting online.
No, nothing extra from me, thank you.
Okay, so I'll refer it back to the committee. Is there any questions on the policies at all? What's been said and presented? Well, that was very, sorry. Go on. Okay, Zoe.
It's not a question. It's amazing, actually, isn't it? Like, I see you at everything. You are always involved in everything. It's amazing to have you in that space, Angela. I think I just want to say thank you, because it's a really important role. And to see how people talk about you in that role, and people within those, is it Jabulani, who talk about you in that is incredible. It's a really good space for you to be in, so thank you.
Thank you for that, Zoe. And I think with regard to care leavers, it's been something that people have looked at for a long time. It's great to see that actually included now. Because the council does undertake great work. Obviously, foster care, I was in foster care, Plymouth City Council, and I'm grateful for the opportunities that my adopted parents thereafter gave me to get where I am. So I know you can't set these people aside. They need a bit of encouragement, but of support. And it's nice to know that support will continue through their lives as well. So keep up the good work on that.
Thank you. Just on that one, when council passed the motion, it wasn't only about what we would do. There was this little note about trying to encourage other people to do the same. And we hadn't really thought about it, I think, when we did that as a council. So that was one of the bits that we put in this first year's action plan, was how could we encourage others to do the same. So the conversations at that round table last week, I think, were really important, because it was the university and Marjons. It was, people like Babcock's and the City Bus, and big players in the city across sectors sitting around a table saying, "We've not thought about that before. wanting to know more, wanting to understand better in order that they could change their employment practices. And for us, that's a win. And I think it shows how when we get partnerships together, it's not just about us. It's us being an enabling leader in the city that facilitates other people to do the work. And if I was to reflect on that in a different context, I mentioned the riots and we gave some funding out. And this isn't care experience young people, but it's a young people's story. We did a small grants programme as part of that, and Heels School applied. Well, in fact, the students at Heels School wanted to apply, and the school facilitated them to do it. And they were awarded some funding for their Voices of Unity project, because young people wanted to engage in meaningful conversations around racism, discrimination and inclusion. And the students designed a mural that has now been painted in the school and looks amazing. And some of the voices that came out of that project, Jacob said, it gives us a chance to not be hidden. Evan said, it makes people feel like they're not alone. Paul said, it's a symbol of diversity in the school, so it's not about a specific type of person. Yasmin said, this mural shows that everyone is equal. And Peter said, it shows that Heels celebrates diversity, all young people's voices. Mrs. Mason, the school principal, said, these statements underscore the importance of visual representation in fostering a sense of inclusion and shared identity within our school community. The mural is more than an artwork, it's a statement of solidarity and an invitation for all students to feel seen and valued. We would have never been able to do a small grants programme had we not built all the relationships. And those relationships built by ourselves, by our officers, and by the police engagement team especially, mean that we've been able to reach out. And this isn't an inner city school. It's not a school in a place where you would expect diversity projects to be happening. And I'm not wishing to be mean to Plimpton. It's in a Plimpton school. And actually, I think it's really brilliant that all parts of Plymouth and young people across Plymouth are saying this is an important issue for us. So, you know, and it wasn't about, whilst it started as a result of the riots, actually what it was about was actually all young people matter, all young people need to be seen, and all young people need to be heard. And isn't it interesting when you start opening doors that those messages happen? Because that then is really inclusive of care experienced young people with disabilities, of colour, of different faiths, of different genders and sexualities. And young people can lead the way to change in some ways more actively than older people can. And I think that's a really positive young people's story that just shows how our approach is reaching into places we would never have reached into a few years ago. So I just wanted to share that one with you. It was given to me as a briefing for a press interview where I could never have used it because it was too complicated, but I didn't want it to sit in my inbox and no one ever hear those amazing things. So lots of people received funding, but our thanks to Heels School for such a brilliant project.
Yeah, I suppose to sum it up really, talk is cheap, action is real. Is the actions in the community. If you see how the council's come in the last 59 years and when I was there to now, to the support for youngsters now, it's absolutely fantastic. And bearing in mind these youngsters are our future. So, you know, anything to encourage them and empower them can only be a good thing. Anyway, thank you very much for your input this afternoon. It's much appreciated. Councillor Penworthy and Councillor Penrose. Thank you. From the members' point of view, the recommendation is members are asked to note the covering report, our commitment to equality and diversity document that was received and approved by Cabinet on March the 10th this year. So item 7 now is the committee will be asked to consider and note its work programme. Is there anything that people would like to add to the work programme or to take away? Councillor Nicholson.
Chair, a couple of things. I've just looked at the tracking decisions against the work programme, but I recollect in this municipal year we had the petition in relation to issues in Central Park, the drainage scheme, and I see there's a recent decision by the leader of the council for additional funding in relation to that scheme. And I was wondering if that could be added again to the work programme for an update, particularly as part of that issue was that the council was going to improve its communications. Now, it wasn't a tracking decision, but it was nevertheless, I think, a decision probably minuted, I haven't got the minutes to hand, that communications would improve. So I'd like to add in that context of if members were to agree that's the work programme, specifically to know what improvements have been made to communications of ongoing works for that project.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable one because Councillor Brian Dells did actually say it would all be finished by August of this year, if I remember right. He did make a commitment to the committee. So could we ask, do you want a progress report? Or?
Well, I'd like it to go on the work programme, probably early in the municipal year, next municipal year for an update, but also the update to take into account the further capital investment signed off by the leader of the council. So it's not looking backwards, it's looking at what needs to be done, but also specifically that area of communication that was a commitment that was given.
Can you put your microphone on, Chris? Sorry.
Yeah, when is the next meeting? I'm just thinking, given that August commitment. Right, okay, yeah.
Okay, so I think so if we bring it back, we can get it before us back on the 16th of July then for an update to where we are and answer the questions. It was all agreed, I think, by the committee at the said time that that would be reasonable. So on that one, with regard to the other tracking decisions, I think there was 2 items we were looking at removing, wasn't there? Yeah, the council tax relief scheme. I'm trying to think what the other one was. It was the council tax release.
It was the cabinet members, relevant cabinet
And the request from panel members that the relevant cabinet members provide them with a list of projects that would be of interest to scrutiny for this municipal year. I think there was a bit of conflict over it because it's like with housing and communities. We're responsible for housing and putting the people in there, but growth and infrastructure are the actual scrutiny committee for dealing with, say, the build. So it was looked at. I don't know whether anybody's got any input on that, but.
Sorry, Chair, what was the question?
No, the question was, would you basically still want to retain, say, minute 9, and the request from panel members that relevant cabinet members provide them with a list of projects that will be of interest to scrutiny in the municipal year? Is that still relevant and in what context?
Well, personally, I think we as scrutiny should be determined in the programme, notwithstanding requests come from cabinet. We don't want to be cabinet led, we want to be scrutiny member led, really. So I would retire that particular tracking decision personally.
Is everybody in agreement with that?
I'm more than happy to delegate the detail to you and the vice chair in order to work that up. That's how I would see it. You've got a cross-party approach on the team, and you know the detail of what might be coming down the track. So I'm very happy for you two to populate that.
Okay, so that's.
Were you talking more of a list of unknown stuff that there's things happening that we don't know about, so it gets some kind of pointers of what's happening, so we know what to bring? Is that the angle you were coming from, Lee?
I don't think it's so much unknown stuff. Some of it is knowns, but as I said, some of it could impart to sort of growth and infrastructure in us. It was that separation point of view. That if you try bringing them in and the question, where do we do? I suppose the thing is that we bring the questions in and we, in future, just direct them to the relevant scrutiny committee if it's not in our remit. Yeah. Is there any regard to the work programme going forward? Because we've got, obviously the public toilet strategy review, which has been put back because obviously there was the reports hadn't been completed, so that's looking a definite, hopefully for July. The cost of living task force, building bridges opportunities, so we've covered that. Obviously there's the outstanding issue of the green bin policy we want to bring forward. Again, we were waiting on a report. I think Councillor Coker was trying to sort it out because we weren't sure where all the bins were in Plymouth. So we need to bring that to a conclusion. So it is, isn't it? Could he? Yeah. So there's those two we want to bring forward as soon as possible and get them out of the way. So there's a bus shelter contract. The contract would need to come back before us. Is there any recommendations from anybody to what they want would like to bring back before the committee or discuss with regard to housing and communities? Is there any pressing issues or any issues they feel would be?
Obviously we've had another one. Obviously for the new municipal, the first meeting we'll consider the work programme. Committee might change, so this is a bit fluid anyway, isn't it, in that sense? So I'd allow it really to flow for the new members, whoever they may be, the first meeting to review it and add to it.
I think that, yes, cool. Everybody happy with that?
Yep.
All right, needless to say, at 15:30 hours, we bring it to an end. Thank you all for your contribution this municipal year, and I wish a happy Easter to the officers and yourselves, your families, going forward. Take care.
Chair, before we close, perhaps on behalf of members, can we just record our appreciation to you and the Vice Chair for the work you've done this year? Thanks.